Welcome to another episode of Ruff Talk VR, a weekly podcast with in-depth game reviews, exclusive developer interviews, and the latest MetaQuest and virtual reality news. We join our hosts, the father-son team of D. Scruffles and Stratus today, as they spend another episode breaking down and discussing the world of virtual reality.
Hey, welcome to this episode of Ruff Talk VR. Today we have one that I am so excited
stoked.
for. Yeah.
I am, dude. I'm a happy dude right now.
You've been waiting for one of these style interviews pretty much since we started the show.
3 years.
Today we have an audio composer who makes some of the best soundtracks in VR. We have Jonathan, who you've definitely heard his work in great games like Arizona Sunshine 2 that just dropped. You know, he's in a bunch of great Vertigo games, but he's freelance. You know, he's in other games as well. So, Jonathan, before I get carried away and stuff, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit better for the audience and maybe even drop what the full name is that I won't butcher for the respect of you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a typical Dutch one. So Jonathan is the easy part. Van den Wijngaarden is my Dutch family name. I've been a composer for video games for, I think this year marks my 20th year working in video games. So that's been a long journey. Like you said, Arizona Sunshine 2 and 7 guests last year. After the fall with Vertigo team before that, and Pathcraft as well, which is a totally different title. And I've been working on a lot of different kind of video games from, doing some music for World of Warplanes, Arena of Valor. I did some stuff for Ubisoft back then for Tom Clancy's End War Online. I've been working with 2 other composers on the sadly canceled Terraria sequel called Otherworld. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I've been working on for quite some time. I'm excited to be on the show. I've been watching a lot of your recent journeys going through the different kind of games. Obviously, also checking the titles that I worked on, which were a lot of kind words. So before we get started, yeah, thanks for that. That's really awesome to hear.
No,
That's
appreciate
awesome.
it. And should be noted, we will have a category in our gaming awards next year for best sound score, whatever that's going to entail. So we feel bad that we left out some folks this year in that end.
Yeah,
because it's really dear to our heart. It's an area in gaming that I put at least almost 50% of that experience can sometimes fall on, because it's going to drive your emotions. Which direction do you have to go? So I've got a ton of. I'll let you go first because I already know you got something.
So you mentioned a pretty diverse list of titles there, from Arizona Sunshine to a title like Pathcraft. And then I definitely want to get in a little bit to the background in Ubisoft and stuff like that. But what's it like making a zombie soundtrack? And then, Pathcraft, if nobody's ever played it, it's a much more colorful, playful platformer. So what's it like kind of doing those vastly different soundtracks?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun actually. I've been juggling a lot of different kind of styles over the years, and I really do like, doing all of these kind of different things, being able to have a change of scenery, come up with new ideas, discover new genres, new musical genres for me to write in. And then maybe in some cases, even how, I know this sounds kind of crazy, but, adapting ideas that I find in one project and then sort of translating that into another project, right? So you can actually, the way certain things are produced, or, there might be an instrument that I think, this is a really cool instrument, and I can do a lot of cool other stuff with it in another different kind of genre. So for me, it's very helpful to do all of these kind of things. It tends to get a bit crazy at times. Like I've been working on, I think 4 different projects last year, all at the same time. I did a bit of music for Ghost of Tabor as well, which was a lot of fun to work with the team. But that was, again, a musical genre that is like entirely in a different spectrum, while also working on the 7 guests, which was very emotional and very intimate. And then we had Arizona Sunshine, which also had a lot of emotion, but, was a lot more raw and primal in its sound. And then I was doing a synthwave electronics only score for an interactive novel called Symbios Torn Asunder. And I was shipping all of these titles all throughout the year, different timings, but especially Seven Guests and Arizona were like extremely close to each other. So that was a bit more stressful than I'm used to, juggling these styles and writing pieces of music for one title and then going to the other title and then wrapping up team demands on that one and then going back and forth. But I think it went pretty okay.
So I'm dying to know, at what point should a studio be looking to bring someone like you in? I mean, are you there from day one, or are you like, okay, we've got a storyboard of sketches, we want you to, how do they paint this picture that you have to add that emotional end to?
Yeah, that's a good one. And it's a question that always surfaces whenever I do interviews. And it's, for me, it's also a question that I don't think is a very one single answer. It depends on the project. For Vertigo, I'm pretty much involved with whatever they're doing in early stages. I think they showed me a very early proof of concept of Arizona 2 when I was still working on Afterfall. And they said, we're going to be working on a sequel, and this is the basic premise for the storyline. And it was also kind of tricky because we were in the final stages of Afterfall, and it was all focused on wrapping that title. But I got all enthusiastic thinking about going back to Arizona Sunshine and whatever I could do with the musical style. So there was both a fun and a challenging moment for me to get involved and know about the project, because now I have to shut off this idea machine that is being triggered. And focus on the project at hand, obviously, which was entirely in a different direction, because Afterfall was more like an electronic score, a lot bigger in a sense, a lot more violent in its sound as well. So that was early on. Same for Afterfall as well, was pretty early on, since the very early demos that they did. But some other projects, it's basically jumping in on a request for the team, and then getting to work off that. So it depends, and sometimes it's just concept art and basic brief from the producer or the game designers. Some cases the title's already there, and I actually get to play something, which is has its advantages as well, because that means that I don't have to do all the guessing work, even though with the titles that I've done so far, I tend to usually not to be too far off from the brief whenever they brief me. But obviously, if you're doing something that hasn't been done before, I still recall working on the very first Arizona game, and there was not really something like it. I had no idea what we were going to do. It was like, okay, there's no benchmark. There's nothing out there that I can compare to. So, it felt like starting all over again and learning the ropes from the get-go. So that was a bit scary, but also a lot of fun.
The unexpected aspect of being an audio composer, that now you have NDAs and you're playing unreleased games, and you hear people speculate about the game. You're like, damn it, I got to keep my mouth shut. So that's actually cool that you get to go into it sometimes a little early, get a good feel of it, because that was going to be my next question. You hear you have a project like Arizona Sunshine. How do you creatively get yourself ready for that? Do you already have an idea of, all right, zombie, or you hear Ghost of Tabor shooter, you go, all right, I already have an idea? Or do you start to watch old zombie movies? Do you start to explore that side?
Yeah, that's also quite diverse. I usually try to, whenever I see a title, there's no mistake about it. I usually instantly have ideas, unless it's a title that, is so far off that, doesn't really ring any bells or doesn't really trigger me creatively. But, that barely ever happens whenever a project lands in my lap. So, the machine stopped working from the get-go. Which is also a disadvantage, because, of course, I need to know first whatever the team is looking for. If they go into an entirely different direction than my brain is going, then it's a lot quicker for me to shut that down and get on the same page with the team, because otherwise it's going to be just a route of frustration and trying to align our visions a bit later on. So what I did for Arizona 2 was a bit different again, because it's a sequel, obviously. So they wanted to go for, basically take the first Arizona game, take everything that was nice and great about it and that people love, and then try to make it better. That was basically the premise. So everything needs to be better, like a better storyline, a deeper storyline, more emotional involvement, which was really connecting with what I wanted to do, because I felt I was very short on time on the first Arizona Sunshine game. It's kind of fun. I've been posting these updates to the team as well, showcasing them. We had so many sound effects, like this and this amount of sound effects for the first game, and right now we're only using that amount of sound effects for just the weapons in Arizona 2. So basically, we're all of the content that went into the entire first game now went into all the sound design for all the weapons, which showed the massive scope that we had. I think we had 8 times the amount of dialogue that we had in the original game. So that was kind of crazy as well. And Rob, the scriptwriter, did an amazing job, and Sky did an amazing job on delivering that emotion. And we did, we do a lot of different kind of takes and try to get more emotion into the performance, and, make sure that our main character grew from this relatively flat character that we didn't know really much about, and try to make it a little bit more three-dimensional. Giving a bit more of a believable human side. So that's kind of how we went for Arizona 2. And my first musical pitch to the team actually was, and it's kind of cool when that happens, but, they were very hyped when they heard the first piece of music. I think I took a week or 4 to sort of, craft different kind of things. I would record different kind of percussive elements, and then I felt, what I want to have, sort of maintain that groove element that I had in the combat of the very first one. So let's expand and maybe, get a bass guitar in there or do something weird there. And I wanted to stick to the weird noises that we had on the original. So the sound design elements, they needed to be there to give that almost like, like a junkyard kind of band that plays, and instruments all are sort of like falling apart kind of idea. So it's not perfect. It feels raw and it feels unpolished in that sense. And then I wanted to move, and it was more like a personal choice, move away slightly from the Carpenter feel that I had in the original, because I had already done so much of that for After the Fall, right? So I did a lot of analog synthesizers, a lot of very 80s kind of horror elements and tribute. Like, I think there's over 20 different kind of horror score tributes in After the Fall, all small little things that I put in there. And I was just entirely drained when it came to that kind of sound. So there were no, it was blank. I had no ideas, and I felt, maybe I can sort of modernize these synth elements, make them feel a bit more modern in that sense, in terms of that they feel maybe slightly more digital, but still broken down and sort of primitive in that sense. And that sort of, for me, worked pretty well. It gave it somehow more a refined sound. I upped the percussion as well, made it slightly bigger and more groove based than the original. And the team liked that initial approach, and that's how we went from there.
So are you also given, like, because I can't imagine if I wanted something written, I can't see being like, here's the sheet music, play it. At that point, it's like anyone could do that. So are you really given all that free liberty, and you just have to have different cuts and things available to lay out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, working with the team at Vertigo, there's, and I think that's the history that we have. And it's not something I take for granted. Like this is kind of exceptional that I'm giving, they trust me with coming up with a vision for their project that sort of aligns with what they're looking for. And so far we seem to be on the same page most of the time. And of course there's going to be feedback rounds, and there's going to be, certain tracks that don't really fit, with certain scenes. I had a lot of chat with Peter, who was the lead a game designer on the project and with Rob as well. And then we came up with elements and then would sort of sketch ideas for, key moments in the game. We had the moment where you meet Buddy, the companion dog, which was an impactful moment. And we had, I think the very major thing that we had in there pretty early on was the conversation with Fred, like the actual Fred, the first Fred, which was, one of the best friends of our main character. And he's sort of, having this monologue with his internal self, which actually is his old friend. And I felt this needs to be impactful, and we have the Buddy. Is he going to make it kind of seen? Obviously, which is also impactful. So I sketched those ideas out pretty early on, and then I could take all of those elements and themes that I developed and sort of, stretch it out over the entire game.
Cool. Arizona Sunshine 2, it's well written. The voice acting.
Get the hell out. It's spot on.
The voice acting in it, amazing. So
the comedic timing is
incredible.
Is really good.
The writers did a great job. The voice actors did a great job, but the music as well. It's like when zombies are about to come, that shit's about to go down from the writing on the wall and just what's playing in your ear. So it's a very well polished cinematic experience. And I think that that's a huge part of what makes Arizona Sunshine 2 so good. It's fun. The co-op experience we had shooting itself is so great, but the little stuff, like how good the voice acting, the writing, and the music makes it the experience that it is. But before we get too carried away, I always like to go a little backwards. We see in the back, there's quite the audio setup, but things don't usually start like that. You mentioned in the intro, some time at Ubisoft and all that, but, how did you get started as an audio composer? Was that something that you always knew you wanted to do as a kid? And then, how did things get started, and how did that lead into the video game industry?
Yeah, it's actually a fun story, and I love telling this story because to me, it really feels like a lot of different elements coming together. I grew up on, during the age when PCs would actually hit the first households, and my dad was very much an advocate of that technology, and he said, this is going to be the future. There's going to be PCs everywhere. This is going to be accessible for everyone. So he made a thing out of, sort of encouraging me to go in that direction and try out those elements. And obviously that led to, playing video games, a lot of video games, the latest video games and whatever I could get my hands on first on, floppy disks and then moving on to CD-ROMs, which is also, in that era, pretty fun to be working on the 7 Gas last year, going back to where, those early stages for me, that was kind of like a dream project. It was a lot of fun to do. And then I was actually taking music lessons from pretty on an early age, playing keys. And I always felt that I wasn't much of a performer in that sense. So I didn't really enjoy much doing all the practice work and, exactly playing what somebody else had written, right? It felt to me a bit restrictive in that sense. I never really worked for me. And it was only moments after I stopped taking those lessons that I felt, I can sit down and write my own stuff and then put my own feelings, stories, narrative, whatever in there. And that's the kind of stuff I'm actually enjoying. So I started recording some stuff onto my PC and playing with that. And at around the same time, I would also, I was a big fan of video games, but also video game music. A huge fan of, the Command & Conquer series by Westwood Studios. And then at one point in time, I felt that, I'm such a huge fan. I was actually recording different kind of video game music on cassette tape, so I could listen to it outside of the game, which was a pretty nerdy thing to do. Nobody would be listening to video game music back in those days. And now we have, entire orchestras playing video game music and big concerts going. So that's cool to see. I got in touch via, just emailing as a, being very obnoxious kind of fan to Frank Lepaki back in the days. And to my surprise, he would actually get back to me and he said, really like you took the effort on sending me an email, and thanks for liking my music. And we just, we started exchanging emails, and that's how that sort of went. And then I explained to him, I've been working on some of my own stuff, and he encouraged me to showcase it to him, and we provide feedback, and it sort of grew into something where I felt, I do have something here that I really like. Wouldn't it be great if I could, make a living out of this and make this my my full-time job. And he encouraged me in that. So after that, I told you it's a long story, but an interesting one.
Take your time with it. I'm loving it.
I got in touch via a friend who told me that a whole colleague from his school time would actually, be starting a new game studio. And I was back at that time still studying, trying to, get into music kind of education. And, I said, I want to, start creating video games as well. I want to do music for video games. Do they have a composer on board? And this was like early stages. There was no funding or whatever, but I just, I wanted to work on a video game project. And it happened to be that the founder of that studio, which was Richard, who's now, the CEO of Vertigo Games, he was a huge fan of Frank Lapaki and Command & Conquer and Westwood Studios. So whenever I told him, I've been, over the last 4 or 5 years, been in touch with Frank, and I've been, learning the tools of the trade, and I want to, follow in his footsteps in that sense and write music for video games. Do you want to have me on board? And he said, yes. He didn't really have to think much about that. And then he got funding. We got to work on the first title for 4 years. And then the housing crisis came in at 2004-ish, I think. Which crashed the market, which made, funding the project any further impossible. The studio went down, and early Vertigo Games was found. And it took them quite some time to get up where they are now, which is, a testament of Richard's vision and definitely a lot of discipline, getting there, with a lot of, hardworking people. But that's, again, also shows you the relation that I have with Vertigo Studios and their projects. That's been going on for quite some time. And I then moved on to Play Logic, which is also a Dutch studio, and it went down 2 years later. We got to ship Virtual Fights and a title called iPad, which was like a AR kind of mixed reality kind of thing for Sony with the Play controllers. And then when the studio went down, it was like, seeing 2 studios go down in, just 2 years. Maybe it's time for me to start freelancing. And that's when I started to building my freelance business.
And it's great to see how things work out. I'm sure it's tragic when studios go down. That's something that we're seeing a lot, even right at the start of 2024. But
Sadly,
sometimes out of those ashes come things like Vertigo Games that maybe if everybody kept their same positions working for somebody else, that never would have happened. Then we would have no Arizona Sunshine 2. And of course, that doesn't, make it any less bad when studios close and stuff, but sometimes it does lead to new beginnings like Vertigo Games. So that's cool to see it come full circle as well. And, you start to work back with them. So what was the first Vertigo Games title that you had worked on?
I think once they started doing virtual reality, I think it was World of Diving that they worked on, which was, I always felt more like a tech demo because they were still trying to figure out how to gamify this whole new market, right? To create something that is interesting enough. Those were early, DK2 headsets, so actual tracking was very limited. There wasn't a whole lot you could do. Actually, it was still sort of like a very, almost like a test kit kind of idea. And then I recall that they showed me very first prototype of back then called Project Z, which was Arizona 1. And I think they had a I think I had a katana or something, or one pistol that you could actually, shoot at zombies, and it was very basic and very limited. But being in VR at that time, never having experienced an actual game in VR, that just blew my mind. I was just, instantly taken there. And I know Richard from that moment already had his vision on, VR is going to be big. This is going to be, once people get what we can actually do with this medium, it's going to change the way we play video games. And I agreed. At my first experience, I played the game. And I think the only thing I said, okay, when and how are we going to build this? Because I want to play more. This is just very cool. Yeah. So it's been quite a ride. My very first VR experience was actually, and it's a fun story, with the other half that worked on the first Arizona game called Jaywalkers Interactive, which is a two-man team, two friends of mine also working in video games. And they were developing a lot of animation and initial game design ideas for the first game, together with the team at Vertigo. And they had an appointment during the Gamescom with Palmer Luckey and his very early Oculus company. He was trying to lure developers into developing for his prototype. And we went to a hotel room where he was actually showcasing the device, and it was like, basically, like literally a hotel room. It was very limited, very nothing like you would expect now with Meta and the entirety of, the company. Just two guys there, Lucky being one of them. And, they had this headset which was taped together, all different kind of wires coming out. It felt a bit like, kind of like going into the Matrix for real, like very thick power cables coming out of the device. And the other two friends of mine said, you got to try this, because they hadn't experienced it yet. They had funded the Kickstarter from Oculus. And I said, you go first. You try it first, and just, we'll see your reaction and how this works. We think it's going to be great. And I put on the headset, and there was this one room of Doom 3 that they had in VR. And there was nothing you could do, just open the door, and, there was this creature lurking in the hallway. And I was like, it felt like magic, like experience something like that. And I took off the headset, and I was sold on the concept instantly. So that was before we started working on Arizona 1. So I already had an idea on where we could actually bring this.
It is no surprise to me that one of the best audio composers in the industry of VR is an OG as well, and an actual,
actual gamer.
Yeah, you look at some of our favorite games like Ghost of Tabor, one that had come up earlier. That is gaming fans making games, and in the case of you, it's a gaming fan making music for games. Music. Yeah, and that I think that's a big reason that the product turns out to what it is. And are you working just on VR games at this point, or do you do, flat screen games or other
commercials?
Yeah, other media as well.
It's for me, it's mostly games, and it's been a lot of VR productions as of the past 2 years, because there was no more time in my schedule to do anything else. Like I said, we did After the Fall, and all the DLC that came with it. I think the team offered over 12 months of free downloadable content for the game, which I still think is crazy for, supporting a title this long. All the kind of new stuff that they offer to the community. And then while we were still wrapping up the DLC, we went into a very first prototype for the 7 guests and the first prototype for Arizona 2. So that ate up a lot of time. And then the team was also externally having developed Pathcraft, and they needed music for that and needed sound design for that. So I've been doing a lot of VR projects. One, like I said, interactive novel, which was a lot of fun to do. I had never done an interactive novel before, so very story driven, kind of music as well. More restrictive in a sense that it's not as interactive as a regular game. So that was a kind of an interesting thing for me to do, to actually fully developed themes that would play at certain points in the story. But it's been a lot of VR titles, and obviously the more you work in that field, the more experience you get. Obviously, a lot of more VR projects get landed in your lap. That I think that's a logical way to see the things. And I'm totally fine with that because it's just a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun working on these projects. It's a lot of work, but seeing the end result, getting to play a game. And maybe this is kind of weird to say this, but I was playing the surgery scene for the very first time, and we had still, nothing was really final yet. They were still having mock-up animations, and they were still, a lot of mock-up stuff. But we had basic voice acting lines in there, and I was testing my music for the first time in the game. And I got goosebumps everywhere because it felt so intense. I felt like, this is what it feels like when you have a pet and you care about it and something happens to it. So that's a lot of stuff that is to me, is a lot of fun. If it actually works, if it clicks, if it works for me, especially for me, because I've heard the musical piece like at least 100 times before it goes into the game. So I get a bit tired of it, and then it goes into the game and it works in the context with everything else going on. Like the team did an amazing job, and Rob writing the script, coming up with the dialogue, and then Sky's performance of, a person just breaking down entirely. It was impactful, and it sort of confirmed for me again that, and this is not to downplay 2D games, which are a lot of fun. You can have these moments with 2D games, but there seems to be, for me at least, a whole additional layer of emotion on top of that. And I'm really excited to see that VR games are finally, in a stage where we can see this happening more and more. It's not going to be, like you say, a lot of fun gameplay, which obviously is the first element to it. Something that stays with you after you turn off the headset, something that, is an experience. Like I had a lot of experiences growing up playing video games. If I can get those experiences to other people, then, that's the best thing that I can actually achieve, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's as important as the actual gameplay. It's like, because you could close your eyes in a lot of instances, especially like a story-based game. If you close your eyes and never played the game, but just heard the soundtrack from start to finish, you'd feel a journey somehow. It might not be accurate, but you would feel and sense something. So it's huge. And I love that as the industry grows, I think it's going to be an area that gets a heavier focus as well. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being known as the VR music guy. Like you need good music for your game, you come to the guy.
Well, dude, how cool is it that you couldn't have taken on more projects for other things if you wanted to? VR took up all of your time last year. That's the coolest thing to hear. And is, you kind of alluded to it with, you become known for things, more things come on your lap, but is it looking like 2024 is going to be a busy year of projects for you as well?
Yeah, so that's the thing is, as a video games composer, it's a lot of fun and easy to talk about past tense kind of stuff, but future stuff, it's it's almost like an instant block unless it's really announced.
Understood.
So there's not a lot of stuff I can share at this point. There is some exciting movement, some stuff that I'm very excited about, but we can talk about that when the time comes, when it's unveiled. But definitely, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's also been a crazy amount of work. I was wrapping the soundtrack releases for both Seventh Guest and Arizona 2, making all the arrangements and, selection of tracks, and then, naming those tracks, which is not something that is a very easy task for me. Because I sort of want to get track names in there that fits the ideas that I have in mind, that I sort of, want to instill a certain feel to the listener. And I did that in early December, just before I took my my holiday break, and I just kept going. I was on like, at one point it was like 35 tracks for 37, I think, even for Arizona 2, which over an hour and a half of music. And it's arranged music. So that's, leaving out all the snippets and loose ends that I felt, they were not cohesive enough for a soundtrack release. And all of those tracks, most of those tracks, they were interactive in the game. So they are sort of like an arrangement, interpretation of how I felt in most ideal situation they should play out. And then we had a similar amount for the 7 guests, where I think had an hour of music and 30 tracks. And then I had the other game as well, which had over an hour and a half of music as well, the interactive story. So at the end of the year, I thought, it's no wonder that I feel a bit tired, and it felt busy this year. So it's a crazy amount of music to write, and I think it's been my busiest year so far. So yeah, it's crazy. It's been fun but crazy.
I just have this terrible feeling when people start digging and they see the word freelance, they're going to be like, "Oh, I didn't know he was available for that." So
going to be getting a lot of knocks on the door.
Oh no, dude, 100%. When your resume is out there, it's not like,
just look at the games.
That's what I'm saying. It's like your resume speaks for itself when you can go, well, I did this, and this, and it's like, oh, okay.
Some of our favorite games, Arizona Sunshine 2,
Vertigo's
Arizona Sunshine
studio.
After the Fall.
We put them as the AAA
Ghost of
VR.
Tabor, game of the year, baby. It's so.
I mean, it's crazy for the team at Vertigo as well, right? I still don't know how they managed to ship 2 titles internally developed within the same year, which such a short time span. And then, when I saw the raving reviews going online for first the 7 guests, and then we got Arizona 2 early December, and then, it got a lot of praise and it connected with people as well. I also felt very happy for them as well, obviously, because it's not just me working long hours, but, there's an entire team giving the best they can to get these titles out of the door, and then doing 2 of those that also, sort of hit the mark in that sense. I think that's a turning point for the studio as well, where they can not only ship 1 quality title, but 2 at the same time. I think that's kind of crazy and a huge achievement for the studio as well.
Oh, 1,000,000%.
Mm-hmm.
Again, AAA studio for VR in our eyes.
Yeah, came out back to back too, like a couple weeks apart. It's not like
I have trust in whatever projects they choose to dump out.
Yeah, and both are full blown narrative stories as well. I mean,
I was going to bring up, it's an hour of music, and it's, as you're saying it, I'm like, okay, it's an hour of music. I'm like, how many hours do we spend playing Arizona Sunshine? Yeah, I'm like, it's like writing a soundtrack for 3 movies just for 1 hour of music, because the gameplay for that hour of music is substantially longer than an hour. So I'm like, shit, a movie's only an hour and a half, 2 hours, but you're going to play a game for 6-7 hours.
Yeah, so the entire score is adaptive. So we had a very adaptive build up for all of these titles. So a lot of the different kind of tracks, they have different kind of layers that kick in at different moments, and they are all driven by gameplay input, player input, certain trigger points. And then we had, for the very first time, certain elements where we would go into a cutscene. I don't want to spoil for people who haven't really played it, but there's a couple of moments where we don't take control of the player, but we take control of the actual timing and the actual flow of the game for a brief period of time, which is the only way to force these story moments on the player. And then we had to go from, actual gameplay into that cutscene. Then there is the duration of the cutscene. There is certain player input, so we don't know the exact duration of the cutscene because there's going to be a bit of a delay. We go out of that cutscene, and then again we have player control, but we have to maintain that cutscene element for a bit longer. This is one of the cutscenes that we had near the end of the game. So that was an interesting approach for me as well. I think there were 4 or 5 different kind of musical pieces that had to sort of fit together, and then being able to transition at any point into the next piece. And then also, it shouldn't really feel like it's actually transitioning from one piece to another, but it should feel like one single piece that's been written cohesively in a way that actually makes sense. So that was an interesting, thing to tackle. A lot of fun because it felt very narrative driven, but still also very interactive and very, very much driven by gameplay.
Well, I'm blown away.
Yeah.
It's the thought process of how you're going to, like, okay, we can say there's 10 layers to something, but we're not going to have the full 10 until this point. So we'll just do this, which is only going to be one little, it's pretty impressive, but way above my pay grade.
And do you ever have to kind of scale yourself back? And what I mean by that is none of the music in any of the titles that you've listed, it all, if you pay attention, you're going to notice how good it is, but it just exists. It never takes away from the scene itself. It just adds to it. How do you balance that you want to make the best track you can?
Don't make like a top 10 out of it,
but you can't exactly steal the show either.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I mean, I think it's just my gamer sense kicking in. I'm not really sure I can re-explain it. I want to highlight the elements during a scene that are important, but I don't. Indeed, like you say, I don't want to, take the spotlight because the music isn't there for the spotlight. It's there to, contribute to the overall story, the gameplay, the feel. Which doesn't mean that it should go unnoticed, but it means that it should not draw attention in a sense that it draws away from what is actually important, which is always gameplay, which is always narrative. And I think, my only approach is to write something that I feel fits certain elements and certain portions of the game. And so far, that usually works. And it does mean, what I did for After the Fall, for example, going from the game score to the soundtrack, I had to rearrange certain tracks because getting a proper build-up was a bit harder for After the Fall because we could go from, 0 to 100 within a couple of seconds in terms of game design. So I had to write tracks that, whenever something would happen, you need to actually be able to hear it, right? It needs to be instant. So all of those layers, they would get, bigger and bolder and bigger and bolder. And obviously, if you have a lot of big and bold layers going, then at one point you stop noticing it, which also is not very pleasant to listen to for, an hour on a soundtrack because you get ear fatigue and there's no dynamic in that sense. So I had to go back in all those different layers and rearrange that for a standalone soundtrack approach to work. But I think that's usually the approach. How I go is sort of, sometimes I would decide also on Arizona 2 to not use like the highest layer that I had or, drop out one of the middle layers that I felt, wasn't really contributing anything. I know we have one point in, the train depot level where you actually have to, the great train robbery where you actually not rob a train, but actually steal a train. And I had a combat track that was sort of working like we had in all the other kind of levels. It would actually build up based on intensity in a fight. There really was only one bigger fight near the end of that level. And I felt that, having higher intensity music prior would sort of make that final moment feel less important, less impactful. So I decided to have different kind of pieces of music that felt more toned down throughout the level and then sort of play the full action track. So all the layers all at once from the get-go whenever the final encounter begins. So you move up to the final section of the level. And to me, it felt a lot better. So in a sense, it's not a whole lot different from a film where you actually go and see, okay, throw something at it and see if it sticks. And if it doesn't stick, how can we sort of work this out? And it's a lot of fun with a different kind of layering approach and different kind of cues and sections that I have. I could sort of shuffle around and then play with it in real time in the game as well.
Just love the, because I always picture it in my head as just like a wave or spikes. It just depending on how you want to see it. And it's like, you've got to You got to go from A to B, but you can't be flat. You can't be all spiked up. You can't be too low.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to carry it on this, like, and it's got to flow. And it's important when you said like the segments, it shouldn't feel like a new song. It should feel like something that's blended right through into the next. So I think it's an amazing juggling act of being able to carry the emotion that you're trying to pull from that audience or person in the headset to feel. You want them to feel a certain way. You want them to think a certain way based on, potential sounds where you might know something might jump out at me or some, it's just, it's an amazing process. I honestly can't get enough of
how it's done, how it's made. I have so much appreciation for the behind the scenes aspect of how much work goes into.
Oh, dude, I'd follow someone around just to watch them be like, nope, I got a thought. And then just start banging out like what they think or, whatever so it's an art that is in some cases underappreciated, but I think starting to get recognized.
It's so important. And 37 tracks or however many, how long does each one on average take? Understandably, I'm sure some, like you said, you sit down, you're like, oh my God, I have the boom, boom, boom. And then others might take longer, but on average, how long would you say it takes to do a track?
Yeah, that really depends. So I try to not to get too hung up on, on the micro scale on the amount of time that I take for writing a piece of music, because I know that, there's this deadline that I have to make and there are certain, milestones in between that I have to hit. And that's my only concern, right? So I try not to get too frustrated on, getting stuck on a certain track. Although I have to admit that, and this might sound a bit weird or something, for Arizona 2, I don't really recall having any blockers in that sense. Like, I think having a very strong story that sort of spoke to me and very vivid imagery and going back to a character that I was, lucky enough to write music for in the first one. It's sort of like going back to an old friend, and then they haven't really changed much in that sense, right? So it takes a bit of time to get into the flow of things, but the things that you actually liked about that person, they're still there, right? So all the elements that sort of needed to be there. So I felt that I had enough time off that storyline to have a lot of new ideas, and it sort of worked out for me in that sense. We had a very strong storyline. We were recording VO in between for the different kind of milestones and hitting the different kind of levels. And that worked really well for me, seeing it come alive, feeling the emotion in the performances, talking with Rob about the script, sending sketches on certain points where we had in the game, trying to get his feedback. He was always very, encouraging in a sense. It's difficult, right? Because you have a script writer writing their baby, their story, their characters and their whole plot line and emotion. And then, I have to sort of translate that into music, and it has to fit his initial idea and feeling. And although it's very, it's a very, very beautiful thing to do, it's also a very scary thing in a sense to do, because I don't want to, I don't want to be the one trashing certain points in the story that have been so carefully crafted, and that, a script writer and the team has a very, very, very vivid imagination. So I guess that's the only thing that's in the back of my head, constantly thinking about, okay, it has to connect with this, it has to connect with, and then sort of trying to go with that and trying to get a feel on where to go. For Arizona 2, I think the most time it took was writing the main theme, and that was mainly because of me. Because I wanted to, this was my first proper sequel, and I felt that, I think the music for the original one is, I think I did all the audio and music within 2 months. It was a very short time span. The team was very relatively low on budget, especially if you compare it to Arizona 2. So there wasn't a lot of time to think about stuff, and a lot of stuff was still being developed as I was writing music. And they were like, we're going to have a refinery level, and there's going to be this element of the storyline roughly. And then the next week they would go, this whole element that we had in the refinery, it has been shifted to this other level, and that's going to be, it's going to be different. So, basically what I did was, write a lot of music, and then we would go and sort of get a feel. Okay, this fits this level, and this works there, and this works here, and this. And for this game, all the major plot lines, they were already there when I started writing. So the emotional input and feel were already there. I knew the main character, and then I took the main theme, which was a last minute thing. I think was the last track I wrote for the original for, the inside the cabin of the main character, where you go to the screen, you can actually shoot the different kind of options on the screen. And I felt having something in there that felt sort of like a theme. And I wanted to, reuse that, but different. So, I wrote it for guitar, and we had a different kind of approach. And then I felt, this whole theme of the game is, friendship, not being alone, loving the person you're with. I think the main gist Rob was going for, if you can be with the one you love, love the one you're with. That's the basic essence of the whole storyline, like the Ali Brothers song. And I felt it was really strong development throughout the game. So I wanted to have, take the theme that I would have for the main character, which was the theme from the original, make a guitar theme out of it. And I wanted to have the theme for, Buddy, companion, the other half of the storyline. And those two, they needed to work together. So the theme of Buddy is sort of almost like a counterpoint theme to the main character, and those two, they supplement each other, and the track gets more interesting if those two play together. That was my main gist to the main theme. And it took a lot of time for me to, have all of these elements in there, a throwback to the original, have this Arizona feel to it, also make it emotional, have a bit of narrative in there. So that took me a lot of time to get that final. I think was the last track that I signed off on. And that's the only track that, took me a substantial, lot more work than all the other in-game material.
All that, I'm listening to that and I'm like, so you want to go into game music, huh?
Yeah. Well, it only took you so long on that one because you love it so much. You cared about it. You wanted it to be exactly what it was. If it was just a project that you were just checking off the box, submit whatever, then it wouldn't have taken that long. But
Right.
Unfortunately for you, it's a game that it sounds like you really enjoyed, you had a connection to, and you kind of had unfinished business with in the first one anyway. So that's really cool to hear that, making a sequel, it wasn't like, doing this project again. It was like, all right, long time no see, old friend, and it's right back to business. And how many tracks would you say get cut that don't make the final game? Do you have like a bunch of ideas that I wish I could have gotten it to work, but maybe Arizona Sunshine 3?
Yeah. Who knows? I don't think there are tracks that there were some tracks on After the Fall that I decided not to use or not get into the game. I think for Arizona 2, because the turnaround time was so fast that a lot of times I sort of reshaped material that I felt didn't really work. There was one track that got cut that I thought was interesting enough to release on the soundtrack, which was for the sewer levels, which we weren't really sure about which direction to go. Obviously you have a dark sewer and, it smells and there are zombies there. So sort of, you would expect something scary, right? But those levels, they were in between very tense plot points in the storyline. So it also felt that having very tense music there and making it super scary was sort of like, not interesting enough dynamic wise. We needed something that felt more serene and more pure in that sense. So my first approach on music was a lot more in that direction, like entirely in that direction, and it felt a bit off. So I decided to write a new track, and then, sort of tone that down a bit. It still has that sort of exploration feel to it. It's less dark than the other music in the game, but it's also not as light as the original version. The original version is on the soundtrack, so I decided to include that anyway, because I thought it was interesting enough for a track to be, on there. I think that's the only thing that got scrapped. And there's a couple of musical pieces and tryouts that we did for the different trailers that we are releasing, where we were also trying to find the right tone and feel of, a lot of the trailers are very lighthearted. They wanted to instill that, this is not a dark, serious game. There's also this comedic undertone. It's serious matter. It has emotion, but, it's not a kind of jump scare kind of horror kind of game. It never was. The original wasn't like that, and we don't want to go there for the second part. So it's a lot of bright colors, a lot of bright outdoor locations as well. So that was a bit of a, trying to get that right sound and still have that Arizona 2, weight of the emotional development of the character in there. So a couple of those tracks probably, fell off the table as we went. Those things they come in pretty hot. So it's a lot of quick back and forth with the team. Often late nights, trying to get it to work as well. So in general, I don't think there's a whole lot of content that we didn't use in the end. Maybe some layers, some elements, but nothing really major.
That's awesome. And you referenced like the streaming or, the official soundtrack and stuff. Is that available on streaming platforms? If somebody wants to go, the official After the Fall soundtrack, can they buy physical copies? How can people find that?
So there's like all of the latest Vertigo, like After the Fall, Arizona 2, 7th Guest, Pathcraft are all on Spotify, iTunes, everything else as well. So all the streaming platforms. If you want to support me, you can also purchase them through Bandcamp. They're on there as well, which is very nice from Vertigo to allowing me to, offer these soundtracks as well. It's not a standard approach, but it's very cool that they allow me to do that and, take a bit of initiative there on my own and make sure that the music goes out there and gets heard outside of the game. It's a lot of fun.
That's wicked cool.
So what I'm curious about, I obviously know you can play piano, or I'll assume. How many instruments are you actually able to play?
It depends on the definition of playing. Now, I'm like I said, I'm not a performer, so it's not on performer level, which is why I prefer working in the studio, so I can polish and do elements. There is a slight tiny hint of a guitar, electric guitar in some pieces for Arizona 2. And, usually the sound designing, synth work, designing the sounds. There's some percussion that I played on a couple of the tracks, which is not the big orchestral percussion, but more like the intimate stuff. So I tend to do a lot of those kind of things as well, creating interesting textures and doing those elements as well. So yeah, it's just fun to play around and do different kind of fun elements, and whatever works. I also like picking up an instrument and just not being able to play it, but just try and figure it out and try to get my own way into it. I did that for the first Arizona game where I actually bought a violin bow and then would actually start bowing lap steel guitar and get certain chords and textures out of that, which I think were very interesting. So I love doing that whole experimentation thing and trying something different.
So there's not an instrument I don't think I've ever picked up that I didn't, even a triangle when you're a little kid. It's like making sounds and making music. And I always took more joy into making up my own shit because then literally playing it. And I think it's great to play other people's stuff. It's great exercise, but the most fun I ever had practicing was like taking myself on these little mental journeys of of sound, which I'm sure at the time was like just nauseous to the ears, but it didn't matter. It's like you're making music.
Yeah,
So-
and you're kind of just doing the equivalent of like a sandbox game. You know, it's
Yeah.
not like you're doing like a
Yeah,
story-based,
yeah.
you fail, you lose, like performance might be. You get to go in the studio, you get to have fun. If it sounds good, yeah, I'll play that. I'll go down that road again. And kind of to the experimenting, how much of the songs are in, pre-written, that you're going to do this instrument for this piece versus kind of ad lib in the studio.
Each instrument one at a time.
Yeah, on the fly.
Yeah, it also depends on the type of instrumentation. I think a lot of the synth elements are a bit more on the fly. What we usually do is just basically get a loop going and then have it running and just try different kind of things. Same goes for the guitar stuff, which is mostly textural kind of stuff, going through different kind of pedals and making stretch out ambient kind of stuff out of it as a background, serving as a background to make sure that we maintain a light Americana feel to it. I know I did watch a lot of fun session for the dream sequence where I felt this needs to be non-distinctive. It needs to have musical elements that sound like something that is not very tangible, right? It feels like it's not really there. It's not this world. It's somewhere else. And I played a lot with my synths over here and, came up with different kind of noises or record them and have them, chop them up and work with that and use that as a bass. And there's a couple of noises that I sort of got to reuse throughout the tracks, especially in hospital level afterwards. Some of these elements return to sort of ground that whole dream sequence where, obviously the dream character is talking to the main character and trying to, persuade him to do something, where the dream elements carries over into the actual world and the actual storyline. I thought it was a lot of fun to do and it worked really well for me. So it's all over the score. There's different kind of elements to it. Similar fashion to Seventh Guest had a similar approach where, a lot of the low key bats and ambient sound design were a lot of, different kind of experimentation, weird noises, doing weird stuff sometimes, to give that sort of otherworld kind of feel, supernatural kind of feel to it. I do really do enjoy that kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, and it should be noted, Seventh Guest is fantastic.
Yeah, a very, very well polished game. So I know that this is probably hard to answer because
I already know what you're going to ask.
Yeah, they're probably all your babies in a certain way, But I've heard you reference like the dream sequence in Arizona Sunshine 2 a couple of times now. Is there one track that you've done that sticks out as, your crowning jewel, your favorite, above all the one that you go, I'm just, for whatever reason, maybe not even you're most proud of it, but it's just your favorite? Or is it too hard to pick?
For Arizona 2 or just in general?
Just in general, your whole roster.
Oh man. Yeah, that's impossible. Like what I said, there's so many tracks that I've written only in the past year and a half. I was very fond of the main theme that I wrote for After the Fall for the main hub area, which, I really enjoyed doing. Really almost felt like becoming John Carpenter in that sense. And, having these moody scenes, dripping with 80s thriller, horror-esque nostalgia. And then throwing in the cello performance in there to sort of, throw it entirely in a different direction and do something different. So I really enjoy doing that kind of track. I find that a lot of times I also really enjoy doing menu tracks, or, we don't really have a lot of actual menus, also for Arizona 2. The main theme is in the pause menu. Whenever you pause the game, it plays the main theme. And there is, I feel a very interesting piece whenever you first start the game and you do all the calibration and config stuff, which has the different kind of elements of the score sort of plucked out of it, the interesting elements, and sort of reused or rehashed in some sort of medley fashion. I really enjoy doing that kind of stuff because it gives me time to really ground the scene in that sense. Where in the game, it's usually it's a lot more on demand, so you can't really space out things as much as you can do, in the more static areas of the game. So I think I enjoy doing that kind of stuff.
So I know we've gone a little over where we usually.
Yeah, I saw the clicker.
Yeah,
I saw it.
This has been
It's totally
such a
fine.
fun interview. I know it's late for you joining us as well, so we're very appreciative of your time. I just have one last one that's itching at me that I'm dying to know, and then we'll let you free. With all this work that you've had making VR music, it definitely, you can tell you're a gaming fan as well. Do you still have time to game flat screen or VR? And if so, what are some of your favorite games currently?
That's a tough one. Yeah. So the past year and a half, I feel like there has been any time to play any video games.
Mm-hmm.
There's one advantage that I have. I have a 10-year-old son who loves playing video games. How could he not? So, I do get a lot of the latest craze in that sense, although he's a bit in a younger age, but, he's a big fan of sometimes having try on the headset for a short duration of time and experience that. So it's a lot of fun to watch whatever he's playing and, checking those games and then hearing the scores and then accidentally finding out that, it's a befriended colleague that has done the score and sort of, discovering games in that way as well. But I try to sort of, pick up the bigger title releases. I got Assassin's Creed last year when it came out. I haven't been able to finish it yet, but it was a very cool experience to me. And I'm still hoping to pick up a lot of more of the titles in the coming weeks that I've missed to sort of get a feel on what, my colleagues are doing, not necessarily in competition, but it's interesting to see that some people might have different approaches to certain problems in VR, that might also spark whole new ideas. So that's a lot of fun to do.
So I got one last question. And it's an off the wall one, but I'm
Sure
real
thing.
curious because the musical ear is a thing in itself. So after being in the industry 20 plus years doing this, can you listen to somebody's game score and sometimes accurately predict who actually did that music just based on what you're listening to?
Sometimes.
That's fantastic.
But it's fun. It means that somebody has really found their, and it also depends whether or not I'm a fan, obviously, because if I'm a fan, I've already heard their scores over and over again, and I know their little mannerisms and their little tricks and their, the way to effectively underscore certain games. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm still an avid video game fan. I'm a huge, fan of video game scores as well as movie scores as well. So there's a lot of fun into listening to it, although that has sort of changed over the years where the fun has also become, a trigger for me to start analyzing stuff. So the initial first reaction would be, okay, this is interesting, and then listen to it and, sort of try to predict where it goes and how it was built. Knowing that, 99% of the video game scores are adaptive. It's also fun for me to sort of try to spot the rearrangement of the stems and sort of get a feel there. They took this stem from this intensity level and then sort of, but that's probably just me on a geeky level, nerding out on game music. There's so much incredible music being written, and there's so many talented composers in video game music these days. It's just a lot of, I enjoy it just as much as the next person.
I think it's friggin' the whole thing to me is, again, above my pay grade to pull off, but
huge appreciation for it.
Oh my God. It's so, you can't have a good game or a good movie without it. It's part of that journey.
We've already said it 2 or 3 times, but it's true.
What do we love more than anything? A fantastic theme song or like intro.
Yeah,
or
like I Expect You to Die does so well.
they do it really good. Yes,
but you can try to have a scary moment just off visuals and enemies, but
no,
without the song, it's nothing.
No.
Or it can be comedic relief. It can be so much. It's so important if it's done so well.
Dude,
you don't even notice it happening.
People will play scary movie theme songs, but they don't act out the scene. It's like they resonate.
So huge appreciation.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to do, especially the two projects that I was able to do last year. I mean, Arizona 2 has a very specific sound, and you could actually feel, and this is the feedback I got from the team, which is always the best stuff to hear. It was a zombie shooter, and they didn't really have the VO in yet. As soon as the music came in, the VO came in, and everything, all the audio started to take its shape. It started to feel like Arizona 2. And we had the same with the 7 guests, where the initial approach was, we just had the library chamber in there. And it was basically just a puzzle game, right? It didn't really just yet instill the legacy of the 7 guests. And then when the first music got into the game, I felt that, it was, sort of bringing that nostalgia vibe back into a whole new game. Which is a tremendous honor to be doing, right? Sort of elevate something that is there and bring it to its full potential. It's a lot of fun, and seeing everything come together and all the great work that people have done on the project. So yeah, definitely it's a lot of fun.
I can't wait to see all the games that'll be coming soon.
I was even going to say
seeing his work again.
Oh, and over an hour flew by. In a flash, I think I could ask 100 more questions. So I definitely think we'll have to have Jonathan back in the future. Maybe
for sure.
Maybe at the end of the year, or the start of the next year, after some more of these projects are coming. I mean, hell, Vertigo Games even last week announced Metro Awakening.
Mm-hmm.
So already 2024 is looking at a great start. I'm not saying who's going to be the audio guy or anything, but that would be amazing. But the point being, Vertigo Games isn't slowing down, so I imagine Jonathan won't be either.
No,
so
going to keep him strapped.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have to have you back on in the future. Thank you so much for joining us again. I know it's late where you are, so definitely appreciate it. But this one's like I'm a kid in a candy shop with this. I'm excited. So
I'm a night owl, so that's no problem at all. It's I don't usually hit the bed really early, so
sometimes that's when the best work gets done, right? At
totally.
Night, so
yeah.
So thank you so much. If anybody wants to give Jonathan a follow on social media too, I'll throw the little link for your Twitter page or anything else you want us to include. I'll throw that in the show notes. And again, just huge appreciation for you taking the time today.
Thanks
for the
having
listener, like always, if you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe, rate us 5 stars.
You can subscribe.
Like the
like button.
Click the like button on YouTube. Free. I heard somebody say if you say like or subscribe on YouTube now, it kind of makes a little like highlight thing around the like button. Okay. So I'm going to try to say it a bunch to test out the feature on this episode. So like the button, and I'll see if the actual digital animation does come up. So thank you all so much for listening today. Jonathan, thank you for taking the time with us. And for the listener, stay tuned for more next week.
Take care. Ciao.